June 6, 1944, D-Day. While thousands of Allied soldiers stormed the beaches of Normandy, a different kind of unit was preparing for a very different kind of mission. They weren't carrying rifles, they weren't trained for combat. Some of them were artists, fashion designers, sound engineers, actors. Their weapons: inflatable tanks, fake artillery, recorded sound effects, and an unlimited supply of creativity. They were the Ghost Army, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, and they would conduct over 20 missions across Europe, fooling German commanders again and again, saving an estimated 30,000 American lives. Hitler's generals never knew they were being deceived by rubber tanks, wooden airplanes, and elaborate theater production. This is the untold story of World War II's most creative warriors, the men who fought the Nazis with deception, illusion, and pure audacity. The secret unit that wasn't declassified until the 1990s, and the art students who became military geniuses. In early 1944, Allied commanders faced a problem. They were planning the largest amphibious invasion in history. D-Day would require concentrating massive forces on the beaches of Normandy. But concentrating forces meant leaving other parts of the front line vulnerable. German commanders would notice units being moved. They would realize where the invasion was coming, unless those units could be in two places at once. Traditional military deception had always existed: camouflage, fake radio transmissions, misleading intelligence. But what the Allies needed was something bigger, something bolder, something that had never been attempted before. They needed to create entire fake armies. The idea came from British deception operations in North Africa, where inflatable tanks had been used with limited success. But the Americans wanted to take it further. They wanted to create a complete deception unit that could impersonate any military division, anywhere, at any time. In January 1944, the U.S. Army activated the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. On paper, it looked like a regular military unit. In reality, it was the most unusual collection of soldiers ever assembled. The Ghost Army recruited from art schools across America: the Pratt Institute, the Philadelphia Museum School of Industrial Art, the Art Students League of New York. They wanted painters who understood perspective and shadow, fashion designers who understood fabric and form, architects who understood structure, sound engineers who understood acoustics. One recruit later said, "I joined the army expecting to fight. Instead, they handed me paintbrushes and told me to make fake tanks look real." The unit consisted of 1,100 men, divided into 4 main sections. Each section had a specific type of deception. The 603rd Camouflage Engineers were the visual deception specialists. They created inflatable tanks, trucks, and artillery pieces. These weren't simple balloons. They were sophisticated, carefully designed replicas that looked authentic from German reconnaissance aircraft. A Sherman tank that weighed 30 tons could be replicated with a 95-pound inflatable that 2 men could carry and inflate in 15 minutes. The Sonic Deception Unit, the 3,132nd Signal Service Company Special, was even more creative. They recorded sounds of armies on the move, tank treads grinding, truck engines revving, orders being shouted. Then they would play these recordings through massive speakers mounted on vehicles, creating the illusion of military movements that didn't exist. The Signal Company Special handled fake radio traffic. They would impersonate the radio signatures of real units, sending coded messages that German intelligence would intercept. The messages were meaningless, but the radio activity suggested large military formations where none existed. And then there were the special effects troops, the actors. These soldiers would dress in the uniforms of units they were impersonating and visit local towns, bars, and restaurants. They would talk loudly about upcoming operations, complain about their commanding officers, and generally act like regular soldiers on leave. German spies and local collaborators would report what they heard, never knowing. It was all theater. The Ghost Army's first major operation was in support of D-Day itself. While the real invasion fleet headed to Normandy, the Ghost Army staged a fake buildup near the Strait of Dover. They inflated hundreds of tanks. They created dummy landing craft in harbors. They broadcast fake radio traffic suggesting that General Patton's fictional 1st U.S. Army Group was preparing to invade at Calais. The deception worked perfectly. Hitler was convinced the main invasion would come at Calais. Even after D-Day began, he held back reserve divisions, believing Normandy was a diversion, Those reserves might have pushed the Allies back into the sea. Instead, they waited for an invasion that never came, fooled by rubber tanks and radio broadcasts. After D-Day, the Ghost Army moved to France and began its most dangerous work. Operating close to German lines, often within artillery range, they would stage elaborate deceptions to mask real Allied movements. Their typical operation worked like this. A real combat division would quietly move out of a position at night. The Ghost Army would move in, set up inflatable tanks and artillery, broadcast tank sounds through speakers, and generate fake radio traffic. From German observation posts and reconnaissance flights, it would look like the division was still in position. Meanwhile, the real division would be attacking somewhere completely unexpected. Setting up a fake division was exhausting work. The inflatable vehicles had to be positioned exactly right. Too close together and they looked suspicious. Too far apart, and they didn't look like a military formation. Each tank had to be angled to catch light the way a real tank would. Shadows had to be painted on the ground beneath them. Fake tire tracks had to be created leading to and from positions. And they had to do all of this at night in complete darkness, often within earshot of German positions. One Ghost Army soldier described it. We'd carry these inflated tanks through fields in the dark, trying not to trip, trying not to laugh when wind would catch one and send it tumbling. Then we'd spend hours with paintbrushes, adding mud splashes and wear marks to make them look like they'd been in combat, all while German artillery could start firing at any moment. The sonic deception was equally elaborate. The sound engineers had recorded actual tank battalions on the move, capturing every detail. The grinding of treads on different surfaces, the sound of tanks accelerating and braking, the distinctive engine notes of different vehicles. Then they would choreograph these sounds into a performance. They would start with distant engine sounds, suggesting a column approaching, gradually increase the volume, add radio chatter, throw in the sound of officers shouting orders, create the audio illusion of hundreds of vehicles when in reality there was just a handful of trucks with speakers. German listening posts would report massive troop movements. Artillery would open fire on the fake positions, wasting ammunition on empty fields, while real American units moved undetected miles away. For special effects troops, the actors added the human element. They would arrive in towns near their fake positions, wearing the shoulder patches of the unit they were impersonating. They'd drink at local bars, flirt with local women, and talk carelessly about their fake unit's plans. Oh yeah, we're the 75th Division, moving up to the front tomorrow. Big offensive planned. Don't tell anyone, though. Said loudly enough that everyone in the bar could hear. German intelligence agents would dutifully report these conversations. The reports would match the fake radio traffic and the inflatable tanks visible from German positions. The deception became a complete, believable story. One of the Ghost Army's most successful operations was Operation Viersen. In March 1945, the Ninth Army was preparing to cross the Rhine River, one of the final major obstacles before reaching Germany's heartland. But the crossing point was heavily defended. The Ninth Army needed every available unit concentrated at the crossing point. The Ghost Army staged a massive deception on the opposite end of the Ninth Army's line. They created the illusion that two entire divisions remained in position, when in reality those divisions had been quietly moved to the Rhine crossing. For 3 weeks, the Ghost Army maintained the deception. They inflated tanks every night and deflated them before dawn to prevent wear. They broadcast radio traffic. They sent fake supply convoys down roads visible from German positions, driving the same trucks in circles to create the illusion of constant resupply. They even created fake command posts with antennas and guards. German commanders never suspected. When the Ninth Army crossed the Rhine, they faced lighter resistance than expected, because German reserves had been positioned to counter the fake divisions the Ghost Army had created. The operation was so successful that German prisoners of war later reported they had been completely fooled. They believed they had been facing full-strength divisions, when in reality they had been shooting at rubber and canvas. But the Ghost Army's missions were far from safe. They operated close to enemy lines, often within artillery range. When German forces bombarded what they thought were American positions, the Ghost Army soldiers had to take cover in their foxholes while shells exploded around their inflatable tanks. Several Ghost Army soldiers were killed during operations. Others were wounded. They carried weapons and knew basic combat training, but their primary defense was continuing the deception even under fire. If they abandoned their fake positions too quickly, German observers might realize it was a trick. One Ghost Army veteran described sheltering in a foxhole while German artillery destroyed the inflatable tanks they had just set up. We watched our rubber tanks get shredded by shrapnel, hours of work destroyed in minutes. But we radioed back that we were taking casualties, that our armor was being hit. We had to sell the deception even as it was literally falling apart around us. The psychological pressure was intense. They knew if their deception failed, real soldiers would die. If German commanders realized they were being fooled, they would reposition forces and American units would face stronger resistance. Every detail mattered. Every inflatable tank had to look perfect. Every sound broadcast had to be timed correctly. Every fake radio message had to be believable. One mistake could cost thousands of lives. The Ghost Army conducted over 20 major operations across France, Luxembourg, Belgium, and Germany. They impersonated over a dozen different divisions. They staged fake buildups, fake withdrawals, fake attacks. They convinced German commanders that American forces were stronger and more numerous than they actually were. Military historians estimate the Ghost Army's deceptions saved between 15,000 and 30,000 American lives by reducing casualties in actual combat operations. But here's the amazing part. The Ghost Army remained classified for nearly 50 years. When the war ended in 1945, all Ghost Army personnel were sworn to secrecy. They couldn't tell their families. They couldn't tell their friends. They returned home as regular veterans, unable to share the incredible stories of what they had actually done. Many Ghost Army veterans went on to successful careers in art and design. Bill Blass became a famous fashion designer. Ellsworth Kelly became a renowned abstract painter. Art Kane became one of the most influential photographers of the 20th century. But they never talked about the Ghost Army. The unit's existence remained classified until 1996, when documents finally began to be declassified. By then, many Ghost Army veterans had died, taking their stories with them. When the declassification happened, the surviving veterans finally got to share their experiences. They organized reunions. They gave interviews. They showed their artwork sketches and paintings they had created during the war, documenting their unique military service. The world learned about inflatable tanks that fooled Nazi generals, about sound effects that convinced German intelligence they were hearing entire armored divisions, about artists who became warriors without ever firing a shot in anger. The Ghost Army's story reveals something profound about warfare. Military power isn't just about weapons and soldiers. It's about perception, about making your enemy believe you're somewhere you're not, about creating reality through illusion. The Ghost Army understood this better than anyone. They knew that a fake tank that looked real was just as effective as a real tank if it convinced the enemy to make wrong decisions. They knew that the sound of an army was as powerful as the army itself if it made enemy commanders hesitate. Their weapons were creativity, attention to detail, and pure audacity. And those weapons proved just as effective as bullets and bombs. But the Ghost Army also reveals something about the men who served in it. These weren't traditional soldiers. They were artists, designers, engineers, creative people who found themselves in a war and had to figure out how to contribute. They couldn't fight in the traditional sense, but they could create. They could build. They could design illusions so convincing that hardened German officers fell for them again and again. One Ghost Army veteran said in an interview years later, "People ask me if I regret not being in real combat, but I was in combat, just a different kind. Instead of destroying things, we created things. Instead of killing the enemy, we confused them. And it worked. We saved lives by making German commanders shoot at things that didn't exist." The Ghost Army's legacy extends beyond World War II. Modern military deception units still use many of the techniques the Ghost Army pioneered. Inflatable decoys, electronic warfare, psychological operations. The fundamental principle remains the same. Make your enemy believe something that isn't true, and you can win battles without fighting them. In 2013, the Ghost Army veterans were finally awarded the Congressional Gold Medal, one of America's highest civilian honors. By then, most of the 1,100 men who served in the unit had passed away, but the surviving veterans attended the ceremony in Washington, D.C., finally receiving recognition for their secret service 7 decades earlier. One 90-year-old veteran said at the ceremony, "We were just kids, artists who got drafted. We didn't know what we were doing at first, but we figured it out. We turned art into warfare, and we helped to win the war." The Ghost Army operated for less than 2 years. They conducted just over 20 operations. They never fired a shot in anger, but military historians estimate they were responsible for deceiving German forces in battles that involved hundreds of thousands of soldiers. They proved that sometimes the most effective weapon isn't a gun or a bomb. Sometimes it's a paintbrush, a recording device, and a really good inflatable tank. So, why was the Ghost Army kept secret for 50 years? The military wanted to preserve the techniques for future use. If potential enemies knew exactly how American deception operations worked, the tactics would become less effective. But there might be another reason. The Ghost Army's success was almost embarrassing for the German military. Hitler's supposedly brilliant generals had been fooled by college art students with rubber tanks. The mighty Wehrmacht had wasted ammunition shooting at inflatable dummies. German intelligence had been completely deceived by fake radio broadcasts and actors in bars. The Ghost Army made the German military look foolish. And perhaps keeping it secret was partly about allowing a defeated enemy to maintain some dignity. But the story deserves to be told. The Ghost Army represents American ingenuity at its finest. Faced with a problem how to be in 2 places at once, they came up with a solution that was creative, audacious, and effective. They saved thousands of lives, not by killing the enemy, but by confusing them. They won battles not with superior firepower, but with superior imagination. They proved that in warfare, as in art, sometimes the illusion is more powerful than the reality. The Ghost Army, 1,100 men, 21 operations, countless inflatable tanks, and an undefeated record of fooling the enemy. They were artists who became warriors, creators who became deceivers, students who became strategic geniuses. And for 50 years, nobody knew they existed. Their story stands as a testament to the power of creativity in warfare, to the importance of thinking differently, to the reality that sometimes the best way to fight isn't to fight at all, but to make your enemy think you're fighting somewhere else. The Ghost Army didn't just fool Hitler's generals. They changed the nature of warfare itself. They proved that deception, when done with enough skill and creativity, could be as effective as any weapon in the arsenal. And they did it all with inflatable tanks, sound effects, and a whole lot of courage.